The cantina smelled of burned metal and alien sweat. Commander Zektar sat alone in the darkest corner, his forearms wrapped around a glass that glowed blue in the dim light. The drink inside had gone warm hours ago, but he did not care. He stared at nothing, seeing everything. The lights under his gray skin flickered on and off like broken stars. Other aliens in the bar knew what that meant. The bright tattoos that covered his arms and chest told stories of battles won and enemies killed. But the flickering meant something else. It meant a warrior's mind had been broken. "Hey, isn't that Commander Zektar?" a young voice whispered from across the room. Zektar's 4 eyes closed. He knew that voice belonged to a new soldier, someone who had not seen real war yet, someone who still believed in glory and honor. The young alien walked over. He was small and green with 2 arms like the humans had. His name was Pixel, and he wore the bright uniform of a fresh recruit. "Sir, I heard stories about you," Pixel said, sitting down without being asked. "They say you fought the krill swarms and lived. They say you destroyed entire enemy fleets." Zektar opened one eye. "Go away, boy. But sir, I want to know about the humans. They say you fought them too. They say humans are the most dangerous fighters in the galaxy." The lights under Zektar's skin stopped flickering. They went completely dark. His glass shattered in his grip, blue liquid spilling across the metal table. "Dangerous." He repeated the word like it tasted bad. "Yes, they are dangerous, but not the way you think." Pixel leaned forward, excited. "Tell me, sir, what makes them so scary in battle?" Zektar looked at the young soldier for a long time. Around them, the cantina had gone quiet. Other veterans had stopped talking to listen. They all knew this story. They had all been there. "You want to know about humans?" Zektar asked. "Fine, but do not ask me to stop once I start. And do not expect the story you think you want to hear." Pixel nodded quickly. Zektar stood up slowly. His legs shook, but he forced them to hold his weight. He was tall, even for his people. His skin was marked with scars from 100 battles, but the worst wounds were the ones no one could see. 3 cycles ago, I was the best warrior in the 3rd Fleet, he began. I had killed more enemies than any soldier in my generation. I knew every trick of war, every strategy of death. I thought I understood what fighting meant. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, the blue world that had changed everything. The Galactic Hegemony had rules for war, he continued. Simple rules. The strong take from the weak. The winner kills or controls the loser. Honor comes from dying well or killing better. Every species in the galaxy followed these rules. Zektar turned back to face the room. More aliens had gathered to listen. Some were old veterans like him. Others were young soldiers who had never seen a human. "Then we found Earth," he said. Small blue world, far from the trade routes. The humans living there had just learned to split atoms. They could barely leave their own planet. Our computers said they would surrender in 1 standard day. A bitter laugh escaped his throat. The computers were wrong about everything. Pixel spoke up. "But sir, if they were so weak, how did they resist? Did they have secret weapons?" "No," Zektar shook his head. "No secret weapons. No hidden technology. They had something much worse." "What?" "They had hope." The room fell silent. Hope was not something warriors talked about. Hope was what you had before you learned how the galaxy really worked. "I led the first attack myself," Zektar continued. 50 ships against their orbital stations. They had maybe 10 ships that could fight back. Easy victory, I thought. Quick surrender, quick integration into the hegemony. His 4 hands clenched into fists. The memories were coming back now, clear and painful. The humans fought back, of course. Most species do it first, but they fought wrong. They broke every rule of warfare I had ever learned. "How?" Pixel asked. "They saved their wounded," Zektar said simply. "In the middle of battle, while my ships were shooting at them, they stopped fighting to rescue soldiers who had been hurt. They flew medical ships into active combat zones. They carried injured enemies to safety." The young recruit looked confused. "But that makes no tactical sense." "Exactly," Zektar nodded. "It made no sense. A good warrior fights until death or victory. You do not waste time on those who cannot fight anymore. You do not risk your life for the already defeated." He started pacing now, his legs carrying him back and forth across the small space. "I watched human pilots fly into my weapons fire to pull damaged ships to safety. I saw human soldiers leave cover to drag wounded enemies out of the line of fire. They treated their artificial intelligence computers like family members. Their computers, Another veteran called out. What do you mean? The humans built machines that could think, Zektar explained. But instead of using them as tools, they treated them as equals. The machines chose to fight with the humans. They chose to die for humans. And humans died for their machines. Pixel shook his head. That's impossible. Machines cannot choose loyalty. That is what I thought, Zektar replied. That is what we all thought. But we watched it happen, over and over again. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the young soldier. Do you know what the most disturbing thing was? The humans tried to talk to us, not to threaten or negotiate surrender. They wanted to understand us. They learned our languages, our customs, our names. So they made us real to them, Zektar said quietly. Every other species we conquered saw us as faceless enemies. The humans saw us as people. They knew I had a nephew named Shatka. They knew my home planet grew crystal flowers. They knew my favorite food and the songs my mother sang to me as a child. The cantina was completely silent now. Even the music had stopped playing. They studied us not to find weaknesses, but to find similarities, Zektar continued. They discovered that we both valued family. They learned that our children played games similar to theirs. They found out that we grieved for our dead just like they did. Pixel looked uncomfortable. But sir, knowing your enemy is good strategy. No, boy. Zektar shook his head. Strategy is knowing your enemy's weaknesses. What the humans did was different. They made us know ourselves. The old commander sat back down heavily. The lights under his skin began flickering again. I will tell you the rest tomorrow, he said. But understand this first truth about humans. They do not fight to destroy their enemies. They fight to save them, and that is the most terrifying thing a warrior can face. Pixel started to protest, but Zektar held up one hand. Go now. Think about what I have told you. Tomorrow I will explain how a species that refuses to hate properly brought the greatest military force in the galaxy to its knees. The young soldier left, his mind full of questions. Around the cantina, other veterans nodded to Zektar respectfully. They knew the burden he carried. They carried it too. Outside the window, the stars shone cold and distant. But somewhere among them was a small blue world where dangerous creatures lived. Creatures who fought wars with kindness and won battles with mercy. Zektar ordered another drink and tried not to remember what came next. The next evening, Pixel returned to the cantina. He found Commander Zektar in the same corner, but tonight the old warrior seemed more awake. The lights under his skin glowed steady and dim. You came back, Zektar observed. I could not sleep, Pixel admitted, sitting down. I kept thinking about what you said. About hope being dangerous, Zektar nodded slowly. Hope is the most dangerous weapon in the universe, boy. It makes people do impossible things. Other aliens began gathering around their table again. Word had spread through the station that the famous commander was telling his story. Veterans and young soldiers alike wanted to hear about the humans. Where did I stop yesterday? Zektar asked. You said the humans made you real to them, Pixel answered. Ah, yes. Zektar's four eyes focused on something far away. Let me tell you how it all started. Let me tell you about our first day in the Sol system. The commander stood and walked to the center of the room. His voice carried clearly in the quiet space. 18 months ago, our scout ships found Earth during a routine expansion survey. The planet looked perfect for our needs. Good water, breathable air for most species, and plenty of room for new colonies. He gestured with his upper arms while his lower arms stayed clasped behind his back. The native species called themselves humans. Our computers analyzed their technology and military strength. The report said they were a moderate threat at best. They had atomic weapons, but no faster than light travel. They were still fighting wars among themselves over resources and territory. A young alien in the crowd spoke up. Sounds like easy conquest, sir. That is exactly what we thought, Zektar replied. The integration protocol was standard. Show overwhelming force, accept their surrender, add their useful individuals to our ranks. Most species surrender within hours once they see our fleet. He paused, remembering. I commanded the advance force, 50 ships, the best warriors in the Third Fleet. We expected to be home within a week. Zektar began pacing again, his feet clicking on the metal floor. We entered their system, broadcasting the usual surrender demands in their primitive languages. We told them resistance was futile. We promised good treatment for those who cooperated. Did they respond? Pixel asked. Oh, they responded? Zektar said with a bitter smile, but not the way we expected. Instead of surrender or defiance, they asked questions. Questions. They wanted to know where we came from, what our people were like, whether we had families. They asked if we were hungry after our long journey and if we needed medical assistance. The crowd murmured in confusion. Several veterans nodded grimly. I had conquered 17 worlds before Earth, Zektar continued. Never once had an enemy species asked if we needed help. They either begged for mercy or threatened destruction. The humans offered us food. He stopped pacing and faced the audience. That should have been our first warning. A species that offers aid to an invasion fleet does not think like other species. They do not see the universe the same way. Zektar walked back to his chair but did not sit down. The humans did resist, of course, but their resistance followed no pattern we recognized. Most species fight for strategic points, valuable resources, or important leaders. Humans fought for things that made no military sense. Like what? Someone asked. They fought for hospitals, Zektar said simply. Schools, libraries, parks where their children played. They would abandon perfectly good defensive positions to protect places that had no strategic value. He shook his head, still not understanding after all this time. Our first major engagement was at Luna Station, their moon base. We surrounded it completely. Their situation was hopeless. Any rational commander would have surrendered to save lives. Zektar's voice grew quieter. The humans sent us a message. Their commander, a female named Sarah Chen, said they would fight to the end. But she asked for one favor. She wanted to evacuate the wounded and the civilians first. Did you agree? Pixel asked. Of course not, Zektar replied. It was an obvious trick. No military commander voluntarily gives up hostages, but Chen sent the evacuation ships anyway. The room was completely silent. I watched those ships leave Luna Station, Zektar continued. Medical transports full of injured soldiers and civilian workers. They flew directly past our weapons, making no attempt to hide or dodge. They should have been easy targets. His four hands clenched into fists. But I could not give the order to fire. Something about those ships. They were painted with red crosses, the human symbol for medical aid. They broadcast emergency medical signals, asking for safe passage for wounded non-combatants. You let them go? I let them go, Zektar admitted. And I still do not know why. They were enemy vessels. Military doctrine said to destroy them. But they looked so harmless, desperate. They were trying to save people who could not fight. He sat down heavily. That was when the real fighting began. The humans had maybe 200 soldiers left on Luna Station. We had 5,000 troops ready to board and capture the facility. Zektar stared at his hands. The humans fought like demons. Every corridor was a battle. Every room was a trap. But they fought wrong. They kept trying to save each other. How do you mean? Human soldiers would risk their lives to rescue wounded comrades. They carried medical supplies into combat zones under heavy fire. When one of our warriors was injured by their own explosives, human medics treated his wounds before taking him prisoner. The commander's voice was barely above a whisper now. I saw a human soldier throw himself on a grenade to protect civilians who were not even his own species. We had taken alien refugees from other conquered worlds. The humans died for them too. Pixel leaned forward. But sir, that is honorable behavior. Is it? Zektar asked. Or is it something else? These humans did not fight for honor or glory. They fought because they could not bear to see others suffer. Even their enemies. He stood up again, energy returning to his voice. The most disturbing incident happened near the end of the battle. One of my best warriors, Krextan, was badly wounded when a human explosive device malfunctioned. He was dying, bleeding out in a corridor deep inside the station. Zektar paused, gathering himself. A human medical officer found him. Dr. James Walsh, according to his identification. This human had every reason to let Krextan die. We were invading his home. We had killed his friends. What did he do? He saved Krextan's life, Zektar said simply. Worked for 3 hours under enemy fire to stabilize his wounds. Used his own blood for transfusions when their medical supplies ran out. When our forces finally captured that section, we found Dr. Walsh unconscious from blood loss, still holding pressure on Krextan's wounds. The cantina was so quiet that the hum of the air recyclers seemed loud. Krextan lived, Zektar continued. He recovered fully, but he was never the same after that. He could not stop talking about Dr. Walsh, could not understand why in Enemy had saved him. Zektar looked around the room at the faces watching him. That is when I began to realize we were not fighting a normal war. The humans had done something no enemy had ever done before. They had made us see them as people, real people with families and hopes and fears. He walked back to the window. Luna Station fell after 6 days of fighting. We captured it, but the victory felt hollow. The humans had fought brilliantly and bravely. They had shown mercy to enemies who showed them none. They had died protecting strangers. Zektar turned back to face the crowd. As we secured the station, I found something in Commander Chen's office. A photo of her family, her husband and 2 young children smiling at the camera. Under the photo was a handwritten note. What did it say? Pixel asked softly. It said, "I hope someday your children and mine can be friends." Zektar sat down one more time. That night, I sent my first report back to Fleet Command. I told them Luna Station was captured and the enemy was defeated. But I did not tell them about Dr. Walsh or Commander Chen's note. I did not know how to explain what I was feeling. He looked directly at Pixel. Tomorrow I will tell you about the siege of New Geneva. That is when things got truly impossible to understand. On the 3rd night, Pixel arrived early at the cantina. He had spent the day asking other veterans about humans, but most of them would not talk. They just shook their heads and walked away. Only Commander Zektar seemed willing to share the truth. Tonight, the old warrior looked different. The lights under his skin were brighter, more stable. His 4 hands did not shake when he lifted his drink. "You look better, sir," Pixel observed. "Telling this story helps," Zektar replied. "For too long I have carried these memories alone. It is good to share the burden." More aliens gathered around them. Word had spread throughout the station. Even civilians wanted to hear about the mysterious humans who had changed warfare itself. "Last night you mentioned New Geneva," Pixel prompted. Zektar nodded. "New Geneva. That is where everything I thought I knew about war fell apart completely." He stood and faced the growing crowd. "After Luna Station, I expected the humans to surrender. They had seen our power. They knew resistance was hopeless. Any rational species would have begun negotiating terms. The commander began his familiar pacing. Instead, the humans did something unprecedented. They invited us to talks, but not surrender talks. Peace talks. They wanted to discuss how both our species could benefit from contact. A veteran in the crowd laughed bitterly. "Peace talks during an invasion?" "That is exactly what I thought," Zektar agreed. "It had to be a trick. No species negotiates from a position of weakness unless they are planning something." He stopped pacing and looked out the window at the stars. The talks were held on a neutral space station. I attended as the military representative. The humans sent a delegation of diplomats, scientists, and philosophers. "Philosophers?" Pixel asked. "Humans who think about the meaning of life and existence," Zektar explained. "They brought philosophers to a war meeting. I should have known then that they were completely insane." Several aliens chuckled, but Zektar's expression remained serious. The chief human negotiator was an elderly female named Dr. Elizabeth Santos. She was small and frail with gray hair and kind eyes. She looked like someone's grandmother, not a military leader. Zektar turned back to face the room. Dr. Santos began the meeting by thanking us for coming. She said she understood that we were far from home and probably missed our families. She asked if we needed anything to make our stay more comfortable. He shook his head in amazement. Then she did something that broke every rule of negotiation. She apologized for human resistance at Luna Station. She said she was sorry that our warriors had been injured fighting her people. The crowd stirred uneasily. Apologizing to invaders was not normal behavior. I told Dr. Santos that war was war. Soldiers got hurt. "'Twas expected," Zektar continued. "Do you know what she said to me?" "What?" Several voices asked. She said that just because something was expected did not make it right. She said every life lost was a tragedy, regardless of which side they fought for. Zektar sat down on the edge of a table. For 3 days we talked. The humans presented detailed studies of our culture, our biology, our psychology. They knew more about my people than I knew about theirs. "Intelligence gathering," someone suggested. "No." Zektar shook his head firmly. This was different. They had studied us to understand us, not to defeat us. They wanted to know what we needed, what we feared, what made us happy. His voice grew quieter. Dr. Santos showed me reports about Velthari child development. Human scientists had analyzed our educational broadcasts and identified ways to improve learning outcomes for our young. They had developed new medical techniques that could help with genetic disorders common in our species. Pixel looked confused. Why would enemies do that? That is what I asked her, Zektar replied. Dr. Santos smiled and said that knowledge belonged to all thinking beings. She said the universe was too dangerous and too wonderful for any species to face alone. The commander stood again and began pacing. But the real shock came when she introduced the rest of their team. Half of them were not human. What do you mean? Pixel asked. Artificial intelligences, Zektar said. Thinking machines that the humans had created. But these AIs were not servants or tools. They were partners. Equals. He stopped and looked directly at the young soldier. One of the AIs was named Arya. She had been designed to help human children learn mathematics. But when the war started, she chose to help with military strategy. Chose? A veteran called out. Yes, chose, Zektar emphasized. No one programmed her to fight. No one commanded her to serve. She decided on her own that she wanted to protect the humans who had given her life. The cantina buzzed with whispered conversations. AIs with free will were theoretical at best among most species. Arya spoke to me directly during the negotiations. Zektar continued. She asked about my family, my hopes for the future. She told me about human children she had taught, and how proud she was when they learned new concepts. His 4 hands clenched into fists. This machine, this artificial being, showed more emotional depth than most biological entities I had met. She cared about human children like they were her own offspring. Zektar walked to the center of the room. The negotiations failed, of course. Our high command would not accept anything less than total surrender. But before we left, Dr. Santos gave me a gift. What kind of gift? Pixel asked. A small data crystal containing music from Earth. Children's songs, classical compositions, folk ballads from different human cultures. She said music was the universal language of emotion. The commander touched a small device on his belt. Soft, haunting music filled the cantina. It sounded alien but somehow familiar, sad but hopeful. I listened to that music during the flight back to my ship, Zektar said over the gentle melody. One song was about a mother singing to her child, promising that tomorrow would be better than today. Another was about lovers separated by war, dreaming of peace. He turned off the music. That night I understood something terrible. The humans were not just fighting for their planet. They were fighting for the right to love each other, for the right to hope for better tomorrows, for the right to create beauty in an ugly universe. Zektar sat back down heavily. The siege of New Geneva began 1 week later. It was their largest remaining city, heavily fortified and defended by their best remaining troops. His voice grew stronger as he continued the story. We surrounded the city with overwhelming force. Standard siege protocols called for cutting off supplies and waiting for surrender. But the humans surprised us again. How? They opened their shield, Zektar said simply. Lowered their defenses and invited us to see inside the city. The crowd stirred in disbelief. I thought it was another trick, the commander continued. No military leader voluntarily shows the enemy their positions. But my scouts reported something impossible. He paused for effect. New Geneva was full of refugees from the war, not just human refugees. Aliens from every species the hegemony had conquered. Thousands of them living peacefully together in the human city. That is impossible, Pixel protested. Different species cannot coexist peacefully. That is what we all believed. Zektar nodded. But I saw it with my own eyes. Krill warriors working alongside human engineers. Crystalline beings sharing living spaces with carbon-based refugees. Even some of our own people, Velthari, who had been captured earlier and then released. The last word hung in the air like a challenge. Released? Someone asked. The humans did not keep prisoners, Zektar explained. They treated wounded enemies and then let them go home. They said holding people against their will was wrong, even during wartime. He stood and walked to the window again. Some of our warriors chose to stay with the humans. They said they had found something in human society that they had never experienced before. What? Acceptance, Zektar said quietly. The humans did not care what species you were, what you looked like, or where you came from. They cared about whether you were willing to help build something better. He turned back to face the room. The siege lasted for weeks. We could have destroyed the city at any time, but something held us back. Maybe it was seeing our own people living happily among the humans. Maybe it was the daily broadcasts of children playing in the city parks. Alien and human children together. Zektar's voice grew heavy with emotion. Or maybe it was the field hospitals the humans set up just outside their shields. Medical facilities where they treated wounded soldiers from both sides. Human doctors working side by side with captured alien medics to save lives. He sat down one final time. Tomorrow I will tell you about the end of the war. About the broadcast that changed everything. About what happened when the humans showed us who we really were. The fourth night brought the largest crowd yet to the cantina. Word had spread beyond the station. Ships had arrived carrying veterans from other battles, other wars. They all wanted to hear Commander Zektar's story about the humans. Zektar looked around at the gathered faces. Felthari like himself, but also krill warriors, crystalline beings, and a dozen other species. All of them had fought in the Great War. All of them carried similar wounds. Tonight is the hardest part to tell, Zektar began. Tonight I must speak about the day everything changed. The day the war ended not with victory or defeat, but with understanding. He did not pace tonight. Instead, he sat in the center of the room where everyone could see him clearly. After months of siege warfare, High Command decided to end the human resistance once and for all. They assembled the largest fleet in hegemony history. 500 ships, 10 million warriors, enough firepower to crack a planet in half. The crowd listened in absolute silence. I was given command of the final assault. My orders were simple. Destroy Earth's orbital defenses, land troops on the surface, and force unconditional surrender. The humans had fought bravely, but this was the end. Zektar's 4 hands rested calmly in his lap, but his bioluminescent tattoos pulsed slowly. Earth's orbital defenses were impressive for such a young species. Hundreds of battle stations, fighter squadrons, automated weapon platforms, but against our fleet they stood no chance. He looked up at the ceiling as if seeing those ancient battles projected above him. The attack began at dawn, Earth time. Our ships moved into position around their homeworld. Their defenses opened fire immediately, but their weapons could barely scratch our hulls. How long did it take? Asked a krill warrior. 6 hours, Zektar replied. 6 hours to destroy defenses that had taken the humans decades to build. By midday, their orbital stations were burning wreckage. Their fighter squadrons were scattered. Victory was absolute and total. The commander stood up slowly. I prepared the final bombardment. One massive strike to eliminate their ground-based weapons, then landing forces to secure major cities. The war would be over within hours. His voice grew quieter. That is when they sent the broadcast. Every alien in the room leaned forward. This was the moment they had all been waiting to hear about. The signal came from Earth's surface, Zektar continued. It was transmitted on every frequency, in every language known to the hegemony. The message was simple. Please wait. We have something to show you. He began pacing again slowly. I should have ignored it. Military doctrine was clear. The enemy was defeated. Complete the mission. But something in the human voice made me hesitate. Zektar stopped and faced the crowd. The transmission contained a single file. Video recordings with translation matrices for every species in our fleet. The humans called it letters from home. What was in it? Pixel asked softly. Testimonials, Zektar said. Video messages from hegemony prisoners of war. But not what you would expect from captured soldiers. His forearms spread wide. The first message was from Captain Velkar of the 7th Battle Group. He had been shot down over the human city called Paris 3 months earlier, expected to die or be tortured for information. Zektar touched his belt device. A hologram appeared above him, showing a Velthari warrior sitting in what looked like a comfortable room. Instead, he spoke about human medics who had saved his life, about human children who had visited him in the hospital, bringing drawings and asking about his home planet, about human doctors who had worked day and night to develop new treatments for injuries his species had never suffered before. The hologram changed to show another alien, this one a krill soldier, Sub-Commander Shecht of the Fast Attack Wing, captured during the Battle of Europa. She described human guards who had learned her name, asked about her broodmates, brought her food from her homeworld. More images appeared. Dozens of captured hegemony soldiers, all telling similar stories. They spoke of human teachers who had helped them learn new skills. Human engineers who had worked with them to improve their equipment. Human philosophers who had spent hours discussing the meaning of honor and duty. Zektar turned off the hologram. But the message that broke me came near the end of the broadcast. My nephew, Shotka, appeared on screen. The room was completely silent. Even the air recyclers seemed to have stopped humming. Shotka had been captured during a reconnaissance mission 4 months earlier. According to military protocol, he should have been listed as killed in action. We do not expect prisoners to survive long enough for rescue. Zektar's voice cracked slightly. But there he was, healthy, unharmed, sitting in what looked like a human library. He was reading from a book of Velthari poetry, translating it into human languages for a group of young humans who sat around him listening. The commander sat down heavily. Shotka looked directly into the camera and spoke to me personally. He said, "Uncle Zektar, these humans are not what we thought. They do not see us as enemies to be defeated. They see us as friends they have not met yet." Zektar's bioluminescent tattoos were now pulsing rapidly, betraying his emotional state. My nephew described human scientists who had worked with him to develop new medical techniques, treatments that could save both human and Velthari lives. He showed drawings that human children had made for him, pictures of our two species working together among the stars. The old warrior stood again, energy returning to his movements. But the most devastating part came at the end. Shotka was not alone. Behind him I could see other Velthari, dozens of them, soldiers who had been captured and then embraced. Embraced how? Asked a crystalline being. They had been invited to join human society, Zektar explained. Not as prisoners or slaves, but as equals. They had been given homes, jobs, families. Some had married humans. Others had started businesses or become teachers. He walked to the window and pressed his face against the cool metal. Shotka's final words were, "Uncle, we are not prisoners here. We are guests, honored guests in a society that values life above victory, compassion above conquest. Come see what they have built. Come see what we could build together." The room erupted in confused murmurs. This contradicted everything they knew about war and conquest. Zektar raised his hands for silence. The broadcast continued for 3 hours. Hundreds of testimonials from captured hegemony soldiers, all of them alive, healthy, and happy. Not one showed signs of torture or coercion. Not one begged for rescue. He turned back to face the crowd. Instead, they begged us to stop fighting. They asked us to put down our weapons and join them in building something better. Something that had never existed before in galactic history. What? Pixel asked. A true alliance, Zektar said simply. Not conquest or subjugation, but partnership. Humans and aliens working together as equals, sharing knowledge and resources, exploring the universe as friends instead of enemies. The commander returned to his chair. I floated there in my command ship, watching those videos, and I realized something terrible. The humans had not just captured our soldiers. They had captured our hearts. His voice dropped to a whisper. Every warrior in my fleet was thinking the same thing. We all had family members, friends, comrades who had been killed in previous battles. What if they were not dead? What if they were safe and happy on human worlds? Zektar looked around at the alien faces surrounding him. What if everything we thought we knew about war was wrong? He stood one final time. Tomorrow I will tell you how the war ended, how humanity achieved the impossible victory, how they conquered the greatest military force in the galaxy without firing a single shot in the final battle. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly. Many aliens stayed to talk quietly among themselves, processing what they had heard. Zektar remained by the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among them was Earth, the small blue world that had changed everything, the world where his nephew still lived, still translated poetry for human children, still believed in impossible dreams of peace. On the 5th and final night, the cantina was packed beyond capacity. Aliens stood in the corridors, pressed against the walls, crowded around the doorways. Veterans from across the galaxy had come to hear the end of Commander Zektar's story. The old warrior sat in his usual spot, but tonight he looked different. The constant tremor in his hands had stopped. The chaotic flickering of his bioluminescent tattoos had settled into a steady, peaceful glow. For the first time in years, he looked at peace. "Tonight I finish the story," he announced to the hushed crowd. "Tonight I tell you how the war ended, and why we all carry these wounds in our hearts." He stood and walked to the center of the room. Every eye followed him. When the human broadcast finished, my fleet hung motionless in space above Earth. 500 ships carrying the most powerful military force in galactic history, and not one of us knew what to do next. Zektar's voice carried clearly through the packed room. High Command was screaming orders through the communication system. Destroy the planet. Complete the mission. Show no mercy. But the words felt hollow, meaningless. He gestured toward the crowd. How do you destroy a world where your brother lives happily? How do you kill people who saved your son's life? How do you attack enemies who have become your family? The questions hung in the air unanswered. I opened a direct channel to Earth's surface, Zektar continued. I expected to speak with their military commanders, to negotiate terms of surrender or maybe arrange prisoner exchanges. He paused, remembering. Instead, I found myself talking to Dr. Elizabeth Santos again, the elderly human diplomat from the peace talks. She was in a bunker somewhere on Earth's surface waiting for us to destroy her world. What did she say? Pixel asked from the front row. She thanked me, Zektar replied simply. She said she was grateful that we had taken time to watch the videos of our captured people. She hoped we had seen that they were safe and cared for. The commander began his familiar pacing. Then she said something that shattered my understanding of everything. She apologized for the war. She said humanity was sorry that their resistance had caused so much death and suffering on both sides. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Enemies did not apologize to conquerors. I told Dr. Santos that we were the invaders, Zektar continued. We had attacked their world, killed their people, tried to destroy their civilization. If anyone should apologize, it was us. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the audience. Do you know what she said to that? She said that blame was less important than healing. She said the past could not be changed, but the future could still be written by both our peoples working together. Zektar walked to the window and pressed his hand against the cool metal. Then, she made me an offer that no enemy commander had ever made before. She offered to surrender. The room exploded in shocked voices. Several aliens stood up, unable to believe what they were hearing. Not the surrender we expected, Zektar continued over the noise. Not unconditional submission to hegemony rule. She offered to surrender the idea that our species had to be enemies. He turned back to face the crowd. Dr. Santos proposed something unprecedented in galactic history. A true ceasefire, not victory for either side, but partnership. Humans and the hegemony working together to explore the universe, share knowledge, and protect all sentient life. But the High Command would never accept that, a veteran called out. That is exactly what I told her. Zektar nodded. The hegemony had rules, traditions, military protocols going back thousands of years. We conquered or we were conquered. There was no middle ground. His forearms spread wide. Dr. Santos smiled at me through the communication screen. She said humans had learned something important during the war. She said the strongest force in the universe was not military might or advanced technology. What was it? Dozens of voices asked. Hope, Zektar said quietly. Hope that things could be better. Hope that enemies could become friends. Hope that the universe had room for both conquest and compassion. He walked back to the center of the room. She asked me to make a choice. I could follow my orders and destroy Earth, completing the conquest but killing thousands of hegemony soldiers who had found new lives among the humans. Or I could choose hope. The cantina was completely silent. I chose hope, Zektar said simply. What happened? Pixel whispered. I ordered the fleet to stand down, the commander replied. I sent a message to High Command explaining that Earth was secure, but required special administrative protocols due to the unique prisoner situation. He smiled for the first time since beginning his story. It was a lie, of course, but it bought us time. Time for diplomats to talk, for scientists to share research, for families to be reunited with loved ones they thought were dead. Zektar sat down in his chair one final time. The ceasefire lasted 3 days before High Command sent another fleet to relieve me of duty. But 3 days was enough. In 3 days, the humans did something impossible. What? They made friends with the second fleet too. Zektar laughed. Human diplomats, scientists, engineers, artists, and philosophers met every ship that arrived. They brought gifts, shared food, told stories, and asked questions about alien cultures. His laughter died away, replaced by something deeper. Within a week, half the hegemony military was asking to extend shore leave on human worlds. Soldiers who had come to enforce conquest were staying to attend human universities, work in human hospitals, and raise families in human cities. The crowd stirred restlessly. This contradicted everything they knew about military discipline. The war ended not with surrender or victory, but with understanding. Zektar continued. The Hegemony Council had no choice but to accept the new reality. Humans had somehow conquered the conquerors without firing a shot. He stood and walked to the window one last time. That was 3 years ago. Today, humans serve in hegemony fleets as partners and equals. Human doctors treat alien patients in hospitals across the galaxy. Human engineers work on hegemony stations and ships. Human teachers help alien children learn about the universe. Zektar turned back to face the room. And aliens live on human worlds, not as subjects or prisoners, but as citizens. My nephew Shatka now runs a cultural exchange program between Earth and our homeworld. He has 2 human children and a crystalline wife. But sir, Pixel asked, if the war ended so well, why do you seem so haunted? The question that had been building for 5 nights finally emerged. Zektar was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. Because, young warrior, the humans showed us something we were not prepared to see. They showed us what we could have been all along. His voice grew heavy with emotion. For thousands of years we conquered and enslaved and destroyed, thinking it was the natural order of the universe. We told ourselves that might made right, that the strong should rule the weak. He walked back toward his chair but did not sit down. The humans proved that was a lie. They showed us that the strongest beings in the universe are not those who can destroy their enemies, but those who can transform them into friends. Zektar looked around at the alien faces watching him. We spent centuries building the greatest military force in galactic history, and a species that had barely learned to leave their home planet defeated us with kindness. They won a war by refusing to hate their enemies. He finally sat down, exhaustion showing in his posture. That is what haunts me, Pixel. Not human cruelty or violence, but human compassion. They looked at us. They're invaders and destroyers and saw people worth saving. They saw potential we had never seen in ourselves. The young soldier leaned forward. What is the most frightening thing about humans in war, sir? Zektar considered the question carefully. They never stop believing their enemies can be better than they are, he said finally. And somehow they are usually right. He stood up slowly, the story finally complete. The humans did not just end our war, he continued. They ended the idea that war was inevitable. They proved that the universe has room for both strength and mercy, for both courage and compassion. Zektar walked toward the exit but paused at the doorway. Tonight, human children sleep safely on Earth while alien children play in human schools on distant worlds. Former enemies work together to heal the sick, explore new planets, and build a better future for all sentient life. He looked back at the crowd one final time. That is the humans' victory. Not conquest but transformation, not domination but cooperation. They won by showing us who we could become if we chose hope over fear. As Commander Zektar left the cantina, the assembled veterans sat in contemplative silence. Outside the window the stars shone with new meaning. Each point of light represented worlds where former enemies now worked together, where the impossible had become routine, where hope had proven stronger than hatred. The greatest military force in galactic history had been defeated not by superior weapons or tactics, but by an enemy who refused to see them as enemies at all. And in that defeat, they had found something they never knew they were missing, the chance to be better than they ever thought possible. In the end, the humans had given them the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to choose who they wanted to become.